Hello and welcome to another episode of Keeping You in the Know. I'm Jennifer Spencer and today we have one of our amazing team members, Mark Coleman, here. And I wanted to just talk with you a little bit about what Mark does as his role on the team as our inspection specialist. So Mark, tell everybody what it is that an inspection specialist does.
Well, we strive to make sure that everything's clearly understood from the inspection results. The inspector goes out, inspects the house, and our clients are there. We make sure that the client fully understands everything that's being reported and everything's kept in the right perspective, and they understand all the defects as well as what's good with the house.
Right. So you're there at the inspection with the buyers and the inspector.
That's correct.
And when the buyers have questions about things that the inspectors pointed out, then you will.
We'll go over everything. We usually ask the clients to come in toward maybe the last hour of the inspection, and when they get there, if the inspector's not done, we walk through everything and look at the siding types and look at the age of the roof and the mechanics and get a good understanding of how the home is positioned. And then when the home inspector goes over his findings with the client, everything usually goes pretty good.
Right. So it's a little bit of a home orientation as well as an inspection.
That's correct.
So I know you mentioned keeping things in perspective, and I know one of the things that comes up is inspectors sometimes, when you read their reports, it sounds really alarming, it sounds really awful, and then when you actually go and look at what the recommendation was referring to, it's either a minor fix or maybe not something as ominous as it sounded. So is that what you mean by keeping things in perspective?
Yeah, all the inspection reports, the inspectors are trained and they're supposed to report basically everything that they find, and some things, they use a lot of boilerplate terms, and it can be scary, and we like to keep things, on an even keel. Sometimes maybe a little wood rot sounds like the house is falling down, and it might be a $50 fix. So, and a lot of the things that keep coming, and we look at hundreds of inspection reports over a year, and we see a lot of the same items over and over and over. So we like to explain what the actual defect is and usually what it takes to resolve it.
Right. So what is a typical, an example of an inspection item that you see on lots and lots of reports throughout the year?
Typical, almost on every report, is the gas meter bonding. Usually it's very rare that a home is brought up to code before we get there, but we're seeing maybe a little bit on less now, but usually there's supposed to be an electrical clamp to protect the house from lightning, and it was new, so it's a new code. So it's not uncommon that the gas meter's not bonded.
Right.
And it's to be fixed by an electrician, and it's usually in the 150 to 250 range, depending on the distance that they have to run wire and things. But it's a common finding. It's on almost every inspection report if there's a gas meter.
Right. Okay. And I know there's a lot of things like that we see because of the literally hundreds of inspection reports that we see a year. We kind of know, we start to see the patterns and what are problems and what are typical recommendations on a report. Would you also speak to the complaint that we hear often about not feeling like, where the inspector is referring the buyer to have an HVAC contractor come and inspect this, have a structural engineer come and inspect that, and so on. Would you speak to that a little bit?
Well, the home inspector is not typically, he's licensed to do a home inspection, so the HVAC is limited to really just checking the temperature differentials. He's not really qualified, so to speak, some of them are, but most of them aren't qualified to, open it up and check it out and make sure everything's right. So a lot of times they're just going to, refer, if there's an age, if it's getting toward end of life, or, it's 10 years old or so, then they might request further evaluation from a licensed HVAC contractor. Same thing with water heaters, plumbing, the structural, if they find a crack. So it's not uncommon to have requests for further evaluation on items that they find in the inspection report.
So should the buyer hire all those specialists to come out and spend that money, or
I mean,
should
it depends.
they
If
not?
it's something that they're not comfortable with, I'd say by all means, it's just an added expense, but it can definitely be worth it. Especially if it's something that the home inspector is pretty strong about.
Right.
Like if the temperatures are off on the HVAC, it's 10 years old, then it's definitely worth, getting it looked at. But keep in mind, sellers don't have to do anything.
Right.
So we can only ask.
It is an as-is contract, and sellers are not required to make any repairs. But the buyer has the option to terminate the contract, and they may say, unless you do make these repairs, we'll terminate, and that gives you a little bit of leverage from a buyer standpoint. But I will tell you, what Mark's not telling you is how helpful he is in this process, because what we've seen is he will go with the buyer and see the house. He'll pour through the inspection report, and then he can help the buyer figure out where they need additional inspections, when it makes sense, when the expense is warranted. He can also help the buyer decide which repairs are the ones to prioritize and to ask the seller to handle, and which repairs are more minor and maybe not as important to put on that list. And he also helps the buyers assess whether or not they should move forward with the house or not move forward with the house, looking at the whole picture. So I think the value that Mark brings in interpreting these reports and guiding buyers in how to handle this is invaluable. And most real estate teams don't have a Mark. They don't have an inspection specialist. I don't know of any teams that have that. I don't know of anyone in that role. That's a role we came up with, because that's kind of your gift and talent. And buyers have been so appreciative of Mark's guidance and input, because he's just incredibly knowledgeable in this area. You also conduct listing audits as part of your role as inspection specialist. So tell us what you do at a listing audit.
So it's very similar, but we strive to make sure that everything we enter in the listing in our MLS is accurate and correct. We don't want any kind of misunderstanding come up at the, halfway through the due diligence process that, they expected one thing and something else was actually there. So
Right.
we look at the dates on the HVAC, we look at the dates on the water heater, we try to determine the age of the roof. We look at everything we can possibly look at to make sure that everything that gets input into our listing is accurate.
Right. And I think that's so important. One of the quickest ways for a deal to tank or get really expensive for a seller is if something is not disclosed properly, is not listed properly, if the information is incorrect. And Mark is there to make sure that we have crossed our T's and dotted our I's, and that really makes a difference. I'll give you an example. If Mark goes out and he sees that there's a 22-year-old HVAC system, it's still running fine, no problems, it's been well maintained, but it's aged, we will make a note of that on our disclosures, and we will discuss that with the buyer at the time of the offer. When they make an offer on the home, we'll say, notice, the HVAC system is 22 years old, it's in good condition, it's running well as far as we know. So when you buy this house and we agree to this price, you're agreeing to the 22-year-old HVAC system. Don't come back during due diligence and ask us to replace the system. We have priced it with that condition in mind. And we get that upfront agreement. Then, when they're in the inspection process and the inspector says to them, this system is aged, it's going to need to be replaced probably within the next 5 years, then they can, the agent says, we knew that, we planned on that, the house is priced accordingly, and they're not coming back and asking us to spend $12,000 on a new system. So just being armed with accurate information protects the sellers and strengthens our position in negotiation. So not everybody has the secret weapon, Mark, the inspection specialist on their team. We feel very fortunate to have him. I think he does a great job protecting our sellers. He does a great job protecting our buyers. And I wanted to just introduce you to him today. So Mark, thank you for sitting down with me. I know this is not your favorite thing to do, to get in front of a video camera, but I really appreciate
Not
it.
a video fan, and I think we went over the one limit, or the
Okay.
1 minute.
Yeah, I think we are over a minute, but there's a lot to talk about with you.
Okay.
So thank you for tuning in with us today for another episode of Keeping You in the Know.